You're listening to Nutrition Matters Podcast with Paige Smathers, registered dietitian nutritionist.
Hi everyone, it's Paige Smathers. Thanks so much for being here. Nutrition Matters Podcast explores what really matters in nutrition and health with a sensitive and realistic approach. To help support the podcast, please consider making a donation at positive-nutrition.com/podcast. If you find this episode interesting, engaging, or helpful in your life, please consider donating, sharing with friends and family, and leaving a review on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, whatever podcast app you use to listen to this podcast. You can leave a review about this podcast straight from your podcast app. Search Nutrition Matters Podcast, click reviews, and then write a review. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook if you'd like to have a little more food for thought. Thank you for listening.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Nutrition Matters Podcast. My name is Paige, and I'm your host. And as always, I'm just so grateful that you're here joining me and just taking some time out of your day to listen to this episode and listen to this podcast. It really warms my heart. You guys are awesome. And it's been so fun over the last few weeks to meet some of you, some of my listeners in person and in real life. And that's just given me kind of new energy in this arena. So love it. Thanks guys so much for all your support and kind words. Really appreciate it. So today I'm interviewing Jennifer Ball, who is a student and just got some good news that she got into grad school. And she's actually sharing her story of her personal story of struggling with an eating disorder. And I think this topic is really relevant for anyone who's felt like they've been in that place where they're just like, no, I am not going to get better. I do not want to heal. I do not want to recover. Or if you have someone in your life who's in that position, this might be a really interesting episode to listen to. So I just wanted to fill you all in on a few things. So just bear with me for a moment on some housekeeping items. This Saturday, if you're listening to this right as it gets released, this Saturday, I am putting on my very first live workshop and live event in Salt Lake City with my pal, Noah Rashetta. And I just want to say thank you to all of you who are coming, and any of you who still want to come to something like that. We might be willing and open to doing something like this in the future. If you're new to the podcast and maybe haven't heard or don't know what I'm talking about, Noah and I are putting on a mindful eating workshop where we will talk about the principles of mindfulness and how they relate to our relationship with food. And I'm thrilled. I'm so excited about this event. I cannot wait for Saturday. And I just wanted to kind of put the word out there that if you're interested in coming to something like this in the future, just keep in touch. Maybe subscribe to my website. That might actually be a good way to for sure keep in touch. So the website is positive-nutrition.com, and just scroll all the way to the bottom on the homepage and subscribe. And or follow me on Instagram. That's also another great place to hear about current things going on. For any dietitians listening, I just want to remind you that I do have a webinar that's 1.5 continuing education credits. This is on April 18th at 11 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. And we will be talking all about what the dietitian can do in the substance use disorder community and in the recovery community. So it's going to be a really, really awesome webinar. I'm super excited about it, and I'm excited to see all of you there who would like to join me. And then I already mentioned, but I just want to make sure everyone knows about my new site. It's positive-nutrition.com. You can subscribe to kind of get updates. Also, that's where you can find the podcast and also blog posts as well. And for anyone listening who wants to keep in touch, it's always great to join the Facebook group. This is Nutrition Matters Podcast Community on Facebook. Just ask to join and I will approve you. Please feel free to leave a review if you haven't already. That's always so helpful and really, really appreciated. So thank you for all of you who have done that. And then last but not least, I just want to make sure you know that I will be releasing a new and updated version of my online course that will be coming out probably in the summer. So keep your eyes out for that too if you're interested in some self-directed learning about positive nutrition. All right, everybody, that is it. So now we'll get on to talking to Jennifer about her story of struggling with an eating disorder and her renewed energy she was able to find in the midst of lots of treatment attempts and lots of history with struggling with this eating disorder. How she was able to kind of pull herself out of a slump and really recover. It's this really inspiring story, so I hope you enjoy. And let's get on to the interview. Well, Jennifer, welcome to Nutrition Matters podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on, Paige. I'm so excited to be here.
Me too. So we wanted to talk about this topic of recovering from an eating disorder when you're hell-bent on not recovering. And I really loved this idea because I have a lot of people who I think will really relate to the idea of, there's parts of you that want recovery. There's parts of you that are hell-bent against it. And I think it's a really relatable topic for lots of people who have kind of wrestled with this. So talk for a minute about why you wanted to talk with me about it.
I feel like that's such a natural place to be in for people to not be all the way in, to not be, dive into the water, but just to like stick their toe in or be like, I'm not touching that water. I'm not touching recovery, because so often people are kind of dragged into it by their parents or by, concerned spouses or whatever. But eating disorders are so tricky in that they're very seductive and they're easy to fall in love with, and they do serve a distorted purpose. And so it's easy for people to not want to recover, but I am living proof that if you kind of just stick it out and trust your team and whatever, that recovery is possible and that you can get fully on board with it.
Definitely. So talk for a minute about why you're so passionate about this and why this came up for you.
So my experience for me was one in which I started out in anorexia for a couple of years and then switched into binge eating disorder for 3 years later. And when I went into treatment for binge eating disorder, I was very concerned that I would also lose the restriction tendencies. And so I basically went into treatment my first 2 times with the intent of just managing the binge disorder and just getting rid of those behaviors. But I wanted to continue to restrict. And surprise, surprise, it didn't work those first 2 times. And I finally had to seek out what I thought was the best, or what was made known to me as being the best treatment center in the world for binge eating disorder. And I sought that out, and I went to downtown Chicago, and they kicked me out of that treatment center because I was so restriction minded, and it devastated me. And I just really struggled with kind of, do I want recovery? Do I not want recovery? I don't know. And so they sent me to a sister program, which was for generic eating disorders. And that absolutely changed my life. I was still hell-bent on not recovering. I was very much like, I'm going to restrict and I'm going to do what I want, but I want to get rid of these binge eating tendencies. And
so it's kind of like there are parts of the eating disorder that you liked, there are parts that you didn't like, and you wanted to kind of get rid of the parts that you didn't like.
Absolutely. I think binge eating disorder gets the rap for being like, quote unquote, the bad disorder, the one that society doesn't glamorize. Everybody wants to look a certain way, and that's not to have a larger body, which is so sad, and which I now realize is completely disordered and fat phobic. But that's the way it was for me, and I wanted to look a certain way, and I was committed to acting a certain way in order to meet those ideals. So I went into recovery completely not expecting to change any of that, but just wanting to fix certain behaviors.
Okay. And so set the stage for, what led up to your eating disorder. I mean, we've talked about this off air, where you were, like you were saying earlier, kind of this idea of the movie star dream and the athlete dream and the pressures of being thin in that world kind of causing some of these things, which then rebounded into, or pendulum swung over into the binging side of things. Talk about that for a minute and what that was like for you.
Yeah. So I initially, when my eating disorder kind of came onset, I had just come out of a very traumatic event in my life and was moving to Los Angeles to completely start over to become an actress. And this wasn't my first experience with acting. I'd been doing it my whole life. I'd been, flying to and from Los Angeles frequently in order to attend auditions and to attend movies, or to film movies rather. And so in my previous movie that I had done before moving down there full time was a dark comedy, and it did very, very well for its scope. But the reason why it was so funny was because my character, which I played, was a dumb, blonde, chubby teenage girl, which is so sad when you think about it, just how fat phobic our culture is, and just how it's funny to marginalize certain populations. But that's beside the point. I came out of that experience completely excited, and I had a whole team of people that believed in me in terms of like my future as being an actress. But I knew that I wanted to look different. I did not want to play. And the crazy thing is that I wasn't even medically overweight. No reasonable doctor would tell me to lose weight, but in Hollywood standards, I was in a larger body, which is completely unbelievable. And so I knew that I didn't want to do that because I wanted to be, the starlet that everybody lusts over on the red carpet. But so I started restricting, but it ended up, spiraling out of control and became an eating disorder. And eventually, this happened for a few years. And eventually I also got very, very interested in triathlon and being a serious athlete, and had a whole team of coaches and dietitians behind me, and, very much wanted to race for the United States. And, that was kind of within reach. And so I started feeding myself for once, because I needed to fuel myself in order to work out X number of hours a week, and to train that much. But the pendulum just completely swung from famine to feast, and I just couldn't stop myself from eating. And it was very, very scary. And this became part of the disorder that I did not like. It became binge eating disorder. And I wanted to get rid of those tendencies and get rid of those binge behaviors so that I could go back and restrict and be thin and look a certain way so that I could be a starlet and be successful in my sport.
Okay, so then what ended up happening, or not ended up, not like you're done. We're all on these processes to kind of learn and grow and become, but what happened next after you finally found this sport that you really enjoyed and got really good at it and knew that you needed to start eating, but then started to feel really kind of the effects of all of the restriction throughout the years kind of hit you hard?
Good question. So it wasn't initially that I noticed the effects of the restriction. I was devastated by my binging, and I picked out eating disorder treatment centers that would work with my coaches and that would work with my current dietitians, my sports dietitians, that basically wouldn't change a thing, but would teach me to, overcome the binge eating tendencies through skills, and psychological techniques. And basically what it did was it just detoxed me from the behaviors, and it didn't work. Big surprise. I, would leave those treatment centers and continue to not be healthy and not be happy. And so finally,
would you continue to restrict after? Is that what you mean? Which then would cause more binging, or?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah. If you don't fix the entire cycle and if you don't fix the entire person, you're not going to be, fixing anything, because if you're binging, you're probably restricting. And if you're restricting, you're probably going to end up binging.
Mm-hmm.
It's so
So many
natural.
people don't realize the connection between the two.
That's such
And
an inherent cycle.
yeah, and you can notice that you're feeling really chaotic around food and feeling like it's so difficult to stop at that nice, full, satisfied level and notice that you're continually eating beyond that, but then kind of think, oh, well, then that means I need to make more rules, right? And then you
Absolutely.
make more rules, which then makes that process even harder. And it's very difficult to connect like, oh, maybe the reason why I'm struggling on this end of the spectrum with the eating, with the feeling like I'm eating more than I need to, is very much because of those rules and all that restriction I'm doing. But sometimes that can be really tricky to recognize.
Yeah, I certainly didn't recognize it for my first few times in treatment. And it took actually getting kicked out of my third treatment center in order for me to understand just exactly how big a part of the eating disorder the restriction was.
So when we talk about this idea of being hell-bent against recovery, it almost requires that awareness to even know what you're hell-bent against, because it's like you thought you were seeking recovery from binging and you're like, yep, I'm definitely on board for that. But I'm imagining that once you realized that restriction was such a part of the binging, that was probably what you really resisted. That you're resisted like, no, I'm okay getting rid of the binging, but I'm really scared about getting rid of or working on recovering from the restriction.
You hit the nail on the head. That was exactly my experience. Was I wanted to get rid of the binge behaviors, but keep the restriction behaviors. And I walked into my fourth treatment cohort, completely expecting that I was not going to change anything. But they were just such a special group, and they completely changed my mind and changed my life.
Okay, so tell us what happened there and what started to click for you, and why was this experience different?
So I went into therapy, completely, expecting to take advantage of it, in ways unrelated to recovery and unrelated to the eating disorder. There were a lot of things. My life was in shambles. I'd become incredibly isolated and had cut myself off from my family and my friends. My anxiety had become so unmanageable that I was no longer able to do the acting. I struggled with compulsive lying and chronic suicidal ideation. My self-esteem was shot. There was absolutely none of it. And as I went through treatment and my therapist helped me begin to work through these issues, I started to see that the eating disorder had a part in all of them. Like, no wonder you're cutting yourself off from your family. That's what happens with an eating disorder. No wonder you have no self-esteem. That's what happens in an eating disorder. And so I saw that the eating disorder had its sticky little hands in every single aspect of my life that I was unhappy with, which was pretty much everything. And, my therapist helped me to begin to work through these issues. And I saw that my motivations slowly began to shift towards genuine recovery. But it was also because of the incredible love of this cohort and of these clinicians that, I was really a problem patient. And I don't mean that to just, that's not just negative self-talk. That's the reality. I was a tough patient. I was very manipulative. I lied all the time. I built relationships on complete falsehoods. And just was not there to recover. And yet the love that my clinicians showed me, and just their faith in me and their belief that I was worth recovery, that completely just changed my heart. And that's kind of the message that I want to share with people is A, give your clinicians a chance, and B, to clinicians, please give your clients a chance. Please believe in them and please love them and show them that they are worth recovering.
So what does that mean? Give you a chance, because I think that sounds really good. I mean, it sounds so good to give that advice of give your clinicians a chance and vice versa. But what does that look like? Like, let's dive into that and really talk about what that means. How do clinicians show their clients and patients that they believe in them and that they love them? Is it something they say? Is it something they do?
80% of therapies, whether it fails or whether it succeeds, is the relationship. So I think just smiling and having eye contact and being genuinely interested in the things that patients are interested in. Like one thing that always got me was when people asked me about my pets, because I was so interested in them, or people asked me about my acting career stuff. Just get involved in what they were doing, and what they're interested in their lives. And for me, it looked like people going above and beyond and just suggesting or offering services that they absolutely didn't have to do. For dietitians, it looked like non-traditionals, whether it be, going out to eat, me bringing in, sharing my food with the dietitian and having a meal with them, or even in therapy, like going out and going grocery shopping together, or just non-traditionals can hold so much power for clients, and I absolutely believe in them, but yet not many people do them. And this is something that can be done both in the inpatient setting and in the outpatient setting.
Okay. And then what do you think? I mean, it's interesting being on the clinician side of this and hearing your perspective, because so often, I mean, this field for clinicians has a very high burnout rate and a very high kind of just, I don't know how else to say it other than it's just really taxing work. It really is difficult to see so many clients and be involved in so many stories, and also be trying to be aware of manipulation, and also have that clinical judgment of making sure that you're in tune with what they need and what's going on for them. There's a lot of pressure on the clinician to do the right things, say the right things to make them recover. And I think that's probably part of what leads to the high burnout rate. So, I mean, I think it's really interesting to hear your perspective on this. And I think it's anything that we can glean as professionals, maybe listening, or even people who are struggling on the other side, listening, to kind of help that relationship be trusting and productive, I think is really, really important. So it sounds like your treatment team just really showed you that they cared about you, that they were willing to kind of get creative in their treatment strategy, and that they really believed in you and trusted in you, and that meant the world to you.
That really did. And this brings me to like the idea of recovering for somebody else. I'm a huge believer in that. Not everybody comes into recovery and says, well, I'm seeing just how taxing this eating disorder is in my life, and I want to change that. A lot of people are saying, well, I want to recover because I have 2 little kids that I need to take care of.
Yeah.
A lot of people say, well, I have a family member that is really relying on me and that I need to recover for. So for me, I recovered for my therapist, Becca, because I wanted to prove her right. And I wanted to show her that I was worth investing in, and that I was worth the love and attention and faith and belief that she had.
This reminds me of Les Mis, in that story where he, is it Jean Valjean, steals the candlestick, and instead of being met with, hate and violence back or something like that, the guy, I forget all the names, sorry, forgive me, but the guy kind of makes an excuse for him and says, oh no, we gave those to him.
And you forgot the silver too.
Yeah, right. And I'm getting goosebumps talking about that. But that's kind of like what you're describing, what's kind of coming up for me as you're describing your story, where it's kind of like maybe some of the ways that maybe your attitude or your behavior would indicate that you don't care, that you're not trying, or that you don't want this, but someone really just said, oh, that's okay. Like, you're still welcome here, and I still believe in you. And just like in the story of Les Mis, where he ends up doing so much good, and in the way they portray it in the play and in the film, in the book, he does that because of that experience with the candlestick. It's kind of like what you're describing, where it's like maybe that's the wanting to recover for your therapist, maybe is what sparked this ability to start going down that road of building trust and experimenting and trying new things and seeing what works. And I'm interested to hear if
your continual process of recovery is more for yourself now or more for other reasons, or kind of how it's evolved throughout the time?
Certainly. So yeah, I think you're totally right in that it sparked recovery for the right reasons, or for the better, more intrinsic reasons of recovering for myself. I began to see that recovery was a worthwhile thing, that I was actually happier, that I wasn't completely consumed by food thoughts. And just life became a whole lot more balanced and good things started happening to me. It was wonderful. And I recognized that that was because of recovery. And so I started to want to do that for myself. And when I left treatment, that was the case. And that's still the case now. I feel like I'm at a place. I've been behavior free for, a year now. And I feel like I'm at a place where I can say like I am recovered, period. And that's just such a wonderful place to be. And that doesn't mean that I still don't do work. I still need therapy sessions every once in a while. I still listen to podcasts, and I still engage with the eating disorder community in terms of focusing on recovery. But I did it for myself, and that didn't start that way, but it became that way. And it's just so amazing what somebody else's belief in you can do for your own self and your heart. It just really changed me, and it changed my life forever.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. When did you feel like that shifted? Like it's tough to see that in the moment, right? Where you're like, oh, this is a profound big moment. But sometimes in retrospect, you can kind of pinpoint, okay, that was a big day, or that was a really big realization. If there's anything like that, I'd love to hear what that was.
Yeah, I'm grimacing right now because it was a really, really hard day for me. But essentially, my relationship with my therapist had gotten so close that I couldn't keep lying to her anymore. And so, or lying to the community that I was in treatment. And so in treatment, we have had this thing that we did, which was narrative therapy. And it was my day to share my story in narrative therapy. And kind of you go over your life story. And in that opportunity I took, or in that space, I took the opportunity to tell people all of my lies, everything that I'd told them that was false about me, to really demystify myself and just become completely clear and transparent with them. And that was the day for me when I recognized that I was worth recovering for, and I was worth doing this right and wholly and just all in 100%. And I made myself incredibly vulnerable, and I was met again with such love and open arms, and in a way of, well, let's get you through this, and let's work and figure out why this is the way that you've been living and why you're such a compulsive liar. And we've been able to work through it, which is amazing. But yeah, it was just incredible.
That's awesome. So it was a hard day. I think that's a really interesting thing to kind of point out. It sounds like it maybe in the moment felt like the worst day ever, or super terrible, but it kind of in retrospect, you're like, yep, that's when things started to shift. I think that's really how we learn, is in those hard moments.
Absolutely. Yeah. All of the worst things that have ever happened to me have been catalysts for growth. And I think that's certainly the case within recovery.
Totally. Yeah. So earlier you were talking about how trusting your clinicians and believing in your clinicians is a really important thing to kind of bring to the table as someone who's working on eating disorder recovery. That sounds so good. But I know that there's a lot of barriers to that for people. Kind of obviously, well, you mentioned this earlier, the idea that around a very big significant chunk of successful outcomes with a therapist is just about your relationship. Do you like your therapist? Do you get along? Is that relationship a good fit for you? And so you're saying that clients can bring certain things to the table of trying to trust their clinicians, although that is really difficult because A, you don't really know them very well, and B, you're that they're going to be challenging your eating disorder, right? They're going to be trying to get you to do things trying to get you to experiment, trying to get you to explore things that really go against what the eating disorder is kind of trying to get you to do or trying to tell you is true. So how does someone do that? Like, how does someone dive into this process head first and say, I'm trusting it, I'm trusting these people? I'm sure a lot of it has to do with what the providers give in terms of, their ability to create a safe space and their ability to connect and to build trust. But just from your perspective, what do you think? What do you think someone listening who's kind of in the throes of this, what can they do to try to trust? That's so hard.
So relationships are a two-way street, as you're saying. It's not just the therapists and the dietitians that are doing all the work. It definitely requires a bit of work from the client themselves. Now, if you're in a meeting with one of your with your dietitian or your therapist or whoever's on your team, I'm guessing that you're not actively trying to run away. You're engaging in a conversation. And so you're doing that for a reason, whether that's because somebody else wanted you to come or whether you wanted to come. There is a reason, and there is some kind of still small voice inside of you that's saying, sit here in this chair, engage in this conversation, and essentially get something from it. And so it just really kind of takes tapping into that and saying, okay, well, maybe there is a little bit of recovery that is worth it. Maybe there is something to it here. And I think it really just requires a little bit of experimentation. You so often, or at least I do, I dip my toe into the water of a pool or the ocean before I dive right in. And a lot of times, like, I think of faith or trust or a relationship as a seed. You plant it, and if it grows and it ends up being okay and, bears fruit, then, it's worth investing in. And so you can do that in little ways, by, revealing little vulnerable bits of yourself and seeing how they treat that. And if they treat that kindly, then you can continue to divest more and invest more in the relationship. Yeah.
No, I think that's really, really important. And also, I think a lot of people struggle with what you're talking about with the idea of like dipping your toe in versus diving in. I think that that's a really good way of describing the whole relationship thing and a good way of thinking about the idea of recovery itself, right? Where it's like you kind of maybe experiment with little things that kind of help you trust, okay, it's going to be all right. But the only tricky thing about that, when you were talking about it, I was kind of thinking in terms of recovery. It's just hard because you really have to let go of control and of knowing what that even looks like for you in terms of what your life will be on the other side of recovery. And I think that's so paralyzingly scary for people. So how did you get past that?
It's so interesting because the eating disorder, it fulfills a purpose for anybody that's doing it. And it's become a pattern because it helps, whether it's relieve anxiety or just gain a sense of control. It serves a purpose, and that's important to somebody. And so you're so right. It's about losing control. And I think for me, the biggest thing that pulled me into that was that relationship with my therapist, and just being able to trust her and know that she will not let things get farther out of control than I need them to be, and that my life will not go down the tubes because she says it won't, and she will make sure that everything is okay. So it takes time to build up that relationship before you can completely let everything go, before you can release that out of your hand and say, I give up, and I will allow you to take me wherever you want to take me.
It's just so tricky because, I mean, there's no guarantees about life, and it's like you want to trust that if you do what your treatment team says, all will be rosy and good. But it's like the truth is you could recover and life could get so much better and so much more rich and full, but you can still have sadness and tragedy and terrible things, which I mean, I don't want to be like the bum when we're talking about this and just be the bummer. But in terms of like, I'm just trying to kind of think of the person listening who's kind of like, yeah, but there's no guarantees. That's just where that can get really tricky, where it's like the trust can be hard. And I think that it's tricky to promise everything is going to be okay, but you can promise it in a certain way that kind of leaves room for the normal things of life that just happen. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah. Like I just found out that one of my best friends in treatment died this morning. And so there are always terrible things that will continue to happen in your life. But the thing is, you learn in treatment other coping skills. You learn things to replace the eating disorder. You don't let go of all control. You still you still can be the master of your emotions, and you can still be the master of your thoughts. And there are other ways, whether it be CBT, DBT, ACT, whatever. There are other ways that you can learn to cope effectively with whether it be your emotions or just difficult things that happen in life. So yeah, it's not that like everything is all of a sudden sunshine and daisies when you're in recovery, because that's not true. But I'm able to handle. I look so much better. I look. My life looks so much better from my perspective, and like little things aren't blown out of proportion like they used to be.
Well, and I just want to point out that's definitely due to lots of factors, but one of them is likely the fact that your brain is finally, getting some nourishment. And it's a whole lot easier to handle the ups and downs of life when you are well nourished. It's really difficult to do that from a place of being in the throes of an eating disorder.
This is true. This is so true.
So anything else you want to say as far as your experience and your story, or advice you'd give to other people who are in the throes of kind of feeling hell-bent on not really wanting to recover? What do you think?
Invest in the relationship with your treatment team, because you're stuck with them whether you want to be or not. And just give it a try. See what happens. And like I did, tackle the areas of your life that you want to change, which is exactly what I did with my therapist. Is I first said, okay, here are the areas that I do want to change that don't include my eating disorder. And that will A, build up the relationship, and B, help you to recognize that the eating disorder is likely the cause of all of these dysfunctional areas in your life.
So tell us about what life is like for you now. What are you up to?
So I am currently applying to, at the time that we're recording this, applying to graduate schools to get my doctorate in psychology. And I would love to do what my therapist did for me, be an eating disorder therapist in a partial hospitalization or intensive outpatient setting for eating disorders. And that's the dream. And I'm doing so well. It's amazing how, like, you just can't imagine what the other side is like when you're really stuck in it. But life is just so much cleaner and crisper and clearer. And I'm able to really live my dream and do all the things that I want to be doing.
That is such an amazing story of hope. I'm so glad that you shared it. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Jennifer. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Paige. It's been such a pleasure, and I'm just so grateful for you and being willing to share the message of hope and recovery and intuitive eating that you do.
Oh, thank you. It's a lot of fun. Well, I sincerely hope you've enjoyed this conversation. If you haven't already, please go ahead and leave a review on iTunes. Thanks again so much for listening, and we'll see you soon for another episode.